August 15th, 1971. Nixon closes the gold window. The dollar floats free, and America discovers something Britain learned the hard way. You don't have to pay debt back if you control the currency it's denominated in. $36 trillion. dollars. That's what the United States owes right now, more than the entire economy produces in a year. And the government isn't cutting spending. It's not raising taxes. It's not selling assets. It's doing something else entirely. In 1945, Britain owed 250% of its GDP, the debt from winning World War II. They couldn't default, couldn't declare bankruptcy, couldn't just walk away. So they inflated. For the next 30 years, the Bank of England kept interest rates below inflation. If you loaned the government money in 1945, you got paid back in 1975 in pounds that bought half as much. The debt disappeared, not through repayment, through erosion. Savers funded the government's recovery without ever knowing they'd been taxed. Britain went from empire to economy in a generation, but the debt vanished into monetary fog. The United States watched. Before 1971, the dollar had a ceiling. Every $35 in circulation was backed by 1 ounce of gold sitting in Fort Knox. You couldn't print freely. Other countries could demand gold. The system had a referee. But Nixon had a problem. Vietnam cost billions. Social programs cost billions. And foreign governments started showing up asking for gold instead of holding dollars. France sent a warship to New York Harbor in 1965 to collect. The choice was simple: defend the dollar's value or defend the dollar's supply. Nixon picked supply. The gold standard died on a Sunday night TV address. No vote, no debate, just the unilateral decision that rewrote the global financial system. And suddenly, U.S. debt had no anchor. Here's what most people miss. Debt isn't a number. It's a relationship between what you owe and what that obligation costs over time. If you borrow $100 at 5% interest, but inflation runs at 7%, the person who loaned you money is paying you to borrow. The debt grows in nominal terms, the number gets bigger, but it shrinks in real terms, the weight gets lighter. This is the quiet mechanism. The Federal Reserve doesn't directly buy Treasury bonds. That would be too obvious. Instead, it creates money and purchases them through primary dealers. Banks buy bonds at auction, then sell them to the Fed days later. The Treasury gets funding. The Fed expands its balance sheet, and new dollars enter circulation without congressional approval. From 2008 to 2024, the Fed's balance sheet went from $800 billion to over $7 trillion. It calls this quantitative easing. The technical term is debt monetization. Between 2020 and 2023, inflation ran at 4% to 9%, while Treasury yields stayed near 1% to 3%. Anyone holding a 10-year bond purchased in 2020 lost purchasing power every single year. The government borrowed $5 trillion during COVID. 3 years later, inflation had already erased 15% to 20% of its real value. Nobody announced this. No policy paper explained the transfer. But the math is simple. If you owe money and the money becomes worth less, you owe less. Germany tried this in 1923. The Weimar Republic owed massive war reparations after World War I, payable in gold or foreign currency. They couldn't print their way out because the debt wasn't in marks. So they printed marks to buy foreign currency to pay the debt. The currency collapsed. Millions of Germans watched their savings evaporate. By November 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy a single US dollar. Pensioners starved. The middle class was wiped out. Wheelbarrows of cash bought a loaf of bread. The difference between Weimar and Washington? Weimar's debt was external. America's debt is internal and denominated in the currency it controls. That changes everything. When you owe money in your own currency, you can't technically go bankrupt. You might destroy the currency, but you won't default. Japan has run this experiment for 30 years. Debt over 250% of GDP. Interest rates near zero. The Bank of Japan owns nearly half of all government bonds. And yet no collapse. No hyperinflation. Just stagnation. Growth frozen. Wages flat. An entire generation waiting for something that never arrives. This is the other outcome. Not explosion, but slow dissolution. Here's the hidden cost nobody talks about. Inflation isn't neutral. It hits people who save in cash, hold fixed income investments, or earn wages that don't adjust quickly. It rewards people who own assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, things that rise with money supply. Debt monetization is a transfer from creditors to debtors, from savers to borrowers, from salary earners to asset holders. And the government is the largest debtor in the system. Every percentage point of inflation is a percentage point of debt relief, paid for by everyone holding dollars. Since 2020, the U.S. national debt grew by $10 trillion. But measured in 2020 dollars, adjusting for inflation, the real increase was closer to $7 trillion. $3 trillion of obligation dissolved into price increases. No budget vote, no tax hike, just silent erosion. This works until it doesn't. The system depends on one thing: dollar demand. As long as the world needs dollars for trade, for reserves, for settlement, the US can issue more without immediate consequences. But that demand isn't guaranteed. China and Russia are settling trade in yuan and rubles. The BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. In 1945, the US held 60% of the world's gold reserves. Now it holds 20%. In 2000, the dollar made up 71% of global reserves. Now it's 58% and falling. The mechanism still works, but the room for error is shrinking. If the world stops absorbing dollars, the inflation that quietly erased debt stops being quiet. It becomes visible, aggressive, uncontrollable. At that point, the choice is simple: defend the currency or defend the debt. You can't do both. Right now, the US is erasing roughly $500 billion to $1 trillion in real debt value per year through inflation. Not by announcement, not through policy, just by letting the gap between interest rates and inflation stay negative. And as long as that continues, the $36 trillion number is just a headline. The real number, the one adjusted for what those dollars can actually buy, keeps getting smaller. Britain lost an empire this way. America might just lose the currency that built one.